Our big story today, again, the first playoff rankings sets come out later today. Two Big Ten teams figured to be towards the top, at least in the discussion for the top four. Michigan State up there by virtue of the win over Michigan, still undefeated at 8-0. Ohio State, of course, does have the one loss to Oregon, but the Buckeyes haven't lost since. Little closer than expected against Penn State this past Saturday. Again, going to be very interesting to see how the committee handles both of these teams. So, Coach, I'll ask you to kind of put on your committee hat. Who do you think is the Big Ten's best team right now?
Ohio State.
Would you rank them the highest of the Big Ten teams? Or you think they're the best team?
I would, you know what? I would give Michigan State credit.
Yeah.
Just like I'm talking about with Cincinnati. I would give them their due. They're undefeated. They deserved it. So I would put Michigan State ahead of them. But in the back of my mind, I would say that, that Ohio State is going to end up on top. Again, now who knows?
Why are they the best team?
I think they're getting better. I mean, I see this football team improving on defense from week one. I think the quarterback was C.J. Stroud. I think he's only going to blossom. I mean, they were playing with freshmen last week against Penn State. The running back, right, Henderson, young player, right? Yeah. And you got him and you combine him with a freshman quarterback. This team, the arrow was pointing up. And I just think, 2 or 3 weeks from now, they're just going to do nothing but better.
To what extent do you worry about this kind of close call against Penn State and the fact that it pointed out maybe some liabilities once again in pass defense, and they weren't necessarily able to control the ball in the red zone in the way they wanted to, settling for field goals instead of touchdowns? How much does all that kind of stuff play in when you assess that?
You know what? From a national perspective, Penn State's a great football team. And Penn State probably played as good as they could play. Now, James Franklin's not going to say that. And they have their deficiencies running the ball. But, I mean, Penn State is a heck of a football team. So I don't think they lose anything by that hard-fought victory. I really don't. What's funny, you mentioned their red zone. I think they score so fast and so many big plays. That's really not an area against a lot of good teams that they have to grind it out and get down there and score. So that's going to be a focus. Ryan Day's going to get that fixed. Because why? They have players that can fix it for them.
Totally agree. They have a great offensive line. It is
absolutely
elite. And, of course, they have a back, as you mentioned, Travion Henderson. Yep. It's just fantastic. You mentioned Ryan Day, and I always find this interesting, and we talk about this a lot, right? That if you have one game where you don't play particularly well, and let's give a ton of credit to Penn State, first of all, because they did play really well. They got up off the mat after losing to Illinois.
Absolutely.
And played an inspired game, I thought, particularly on defense, and then Sean Clifford was really good.
They lost to Illinois.
Yeah,
Think about that.
No, I know. Okay, but all that being said, you're Ryan Day. Put yourself in that spot. You've been in the spot with really good teams where everyone believes kind of we're just going to roll it out there and we're going to win. We're going to win by 4 touchdowns because that's what we've been doing for a month straight. And all of a sudden you have a game where you don't win by 4 touchdowns. How much is it easier to coach them the next week?
Absolutely.
I mean, does it kind of put you in a spot where you can emphasize, hey, look, one play here, one play there. Absolutely. We're out of this thing.
No, you're right on point, and we've all seen it. I mean, and I was fortunate to be on some teams down in Miami. We didn't lose. We were beating people by just like Ohio State. And you're always looking for something as a coach. And I used to always say, hey, we got to cause a crisis sometimes. If things, I'm serious. If things are going too good, and you cause a little bit of crisis, and Ryan Day can stand there and he can pound on the table and say, this is ridiculous. We're in the red zone and we're not. What's different? On and on. So this will give them an attention grabber this week, and they'll get their focus back. I think it's really a good thing. I mean, they beat a heck of a football team. Penn State's a great team. And it gives them a little bit of energy and a little bit of juice to kind of shake things up.
I think it's interesting because obviously if you have 3 or 4 games in a row where you don't play well, then maybe that's just who we are, right?
Right.
But I think we've seen enough evidence to support the notion that Ohio State is better than what we saw Saturday. And again, that's taking nothing away from Penn State.
And, speaking of Ohio State, I got to say this because, obviously we all – we live in a world, in our own little worlds. We're all about the Big Ten here. We're in Ohio State, Michigan, Northwestern, whoever. So I'm out there in L.A. last weekend, and I'm sitting there with Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart and the guys, and we're talking. And, we're talking playoffs like we are now. And in their minds, Oregon, and everyone's just pushed them to the side. But in their minds, the Oregon football team that went to Columbus and beat Ohio State, if they run the table, Rever, they see, except for strength of scheduling, they see this Oregon football team as a major player for the playoffs. And, it doesn't come up very often anywhere except in their little world, but I think it's real. We got to keep an eye on that.
I think the challenge for Oregon is going to be they have nothing to reinforce their schedule going forward. There's no one else ranked in the league other than them, right? It's crazy.
True.
So even you say, well, they have to play Utah, they might have to play Utah twice. Utah isn't in the rankings. Now maybe they'll end up in the playoff rankings.
What about, is there any sentiment for, they haven't been in since, 2016 when Washington went. Does the committee say, boy, it'd be nice to get a Pac-12 team in and have, does that play into it? I don't know.
They're not supposed to. But,
it's not supposed to, but
human nature.
That's what makes this fun, and interesting.
Right. We'll find out a lot of how they're thinking tonight. I do want to get your take, obviously, on Michigan and Michigan State. A fabulous game. Your biggest takeaway after watching that one?
Kenneth Walker. I got to start with him, really, because I think that he was, in my mind, a heck of a player, but I think he has moved legitimately, in the top group as far as in the Heisman conversation and being one of the best players in the country, and the reason I say that is, in the fourth quarter, his performance in the fourth quarter when the game's on the line and it's pressure time and everybody's tired and the crowd and everything involved, and this kid did not blink. If anything, he took it to another level, and that's what the great ones do. I coached Ricky Williams, and I was teammates with Tony Dorsett. Some Emmitt Smith, some Heisman winning backs. And in the fourth quarter, that's when they all feel that they get that edge and they will elevate their game. And that's exactly what happened with this kid.
One thing that really struck me, and I always love picking your brain just from a coaching point of view, is the degree to which Mel Tucker, I don't want to say gambled, but his aggression. He was incredibly aggressive in this game. Going for two a couple times, going for it on fourth down in situations where maybe you could have kicked. It just felt like he never took his foot off the gas. Is that something that you do as a coach, that you say before the game, hey, we're just going to be aggressive? Every time there's something that might be a coin flip, we're just going to say, no, we're going to opt for, let's be aggressive, let's try to shove it down their throat, let's be relentless? Or is it something that you think you do more situationally, where in the back of your mind, you think, well, all things being equal, I want to go for it, but we're still going to do, I'm not suggesting he didn't do what's prudent, but we're going to do kind of what the moment dictates.
No, he did. He took some chances. There's no question about that. But I think that Mel went into this game and he said, you know what? Everybody is believing that Michigan's the best team. Well, talking to his team, he probably said, I'll tell you guys what, every chance we get where I have to make a decision to win this football game, we're going to do it. If we got to run fake punts, onside kicks, go for it on fourth down, we're going to be aggressive, and we're going to do everything we can to win this game. So I think that was probably the mentality and the theme coming in, and he held true to it. On the other side, Jim, they got what, an 8-point lead at the start of the fourth quarter, and they run the ball 7 times. He got too aggressive. He really did. No one's talking about this, but I'm watching that game and I'm saying, Jim, run the football. I know they had 7 carries for 7. Run the football. Run the football. Don't get your quarterback in third and long situations. They were 1 for 5 in the fourth quarter, and I think 3 of the 5 were 3rd and 8 or longer. That's tough to overcome. And I thought he was too aggressive, too. I really did. And I thought that he should have just stayed with it. 2 yards. Hey, if you're going to get in 3rd down, I like 3rd and 5 a lot more than I like 3rd and 8.
How big a challenge is this now for him? Because we all know what the rhetoric is. Now, the reality, and I said this yesterday, and I really believe this, they're good. They played well. There were about 6 or 7 plays that had any of them gone the other way, Michigan would have won the game.
Absolutely.
So it's not like they're far away. It's not like you couldn't put together a scenario in your mind where they run the table the rest of the way and they end up in the playoff. But we all know what the narrative is this week. And the narrative is that Michigan doesn't win games like this under Jim Harbaugh. And there are all the stats to back that up. So what do you do now with a team that you know is a good football team, but that just can't seem to get itself over the hump in situations like this one?
Yeah, I think in the past that Jim, when they lost a game like this, they were pretty much out of the Big Ten championship race, the playoff, everything was eliminated. Where now I think he can go in there, and I've done it, and get the paper and block everything out. Just X everything that you've done so far this year. And all you want to show the team right now, this is the games that we have left. And then at the end, you have the Big Ten championship game, and then you have the playoffs. And you say, right here, if we take care of this right there, we can end up here. Does everybody understand that? I mean, that's the rallying cry that is tough of emotional and rivalry loss and everything else. It's the only way you can do it. You just got to say, a new season starts now, and we got to take care of business one at a time, and we can still get to where we want to be. That's got to be the selling point.
And it's just, I think it's an easy sell. I mean, Indiana, Penn State, Maryland, Ohio State.
Yep.
Those are all games. I know Ohio State, to say that's been their kryptonite is an understatement.
Yep.
But I do think that what you saw from Ohio State this past week at least leads you to believe that there could be a day where you play really well and they don't play as well as they're capable of playing, and you beat them. And that game's in Ann Arbor, and there's no reason to think it can't be that way. But again, to your point, you got to beat Indiana and Penn State, Maryland.
Yeah, and you got to get some confidence. You got to have confidence going into the Ohio State game, And now it starts this week. Go out and get a win, play good, and then build, for the next one. And by the time you get to Columbus time, it's going to be you got to be feeling good about yourself.
Yeah. That's fascinating. The psychology of it is always so interesting.
And
there's a lot of it this week.
And Mel's kind of playing. No, I don't want to say playing with house money, but he's exceeded expectations off the chart. So you can be a little more aggressive that way. We're now, Jim, here comes the pressure now. And so now sometimes you make those decisions and you're feeling it a little bit. You shouldn't, but it's human nature. Trust me, it's human nature. And, you got to shake it. You got to shake it quick.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And we talked about this last week. Who was the pressure on? The pressure was clearly on Michigan.
100%.
And if the pressure's on the other side, and you're Mel Tucker, that allows you to do all these things, to roll the dice a little bit more than you would, because if it backfires, hey, we went for it. We
aggressive. We're trying to win.
Yep, absolutely. All right, more from Wani coming up later in the show. Let's go back to the football, joined by Pat Forde from Sports Illustrated as we ponder the incredible start here by Mel Tucker. He becomes just the fifth coach, as you can see, to start 8-0 in his second full season since 1953 in the Big Ten. Jim Harbaugh, interestingly enough, the last to do it. Jim Tressel, of course, won a national championship in year 2. And Pat joining us there now. And Pat, as we look at this early start here for Tucker, now 8-0, and among some luminaries there, interested, you were in East Lansing. What are your takeaways from what you saw from Tucker's bunch?
Well, phenomenal game. Best game of the season in college football, in my opinion, and I've watched a whole bunch of them. It was two very good teams playing at a very high level with a lot of drama, huge plays, dramatic plays, big decisions, big replay reviews, some controversy thrown in the mix. So it had everything you want. You really don't want cars getting flipped over and windshields kicked in. I think Michigan State, a small fraction of their fans, took that a little too far. But otherwise, it had everything you were hoping for that game to be. And Michigan State, the thing that I walked away saying there is a medal to that team and kind of a championship-level resolve. But we're down 16, doesn't matter. We're going to figure it out. We're going to make the plays we have to make. And for a group that really coalesced with a lot of new parts and everything this year, that's pretty remarkable, I think, to have that sort of special it factor that I think allows teams to win big games when they're pressed up against it and very close to losing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were so many moments there where it just felt like Michigan State had to come through, kind of what I was talking about with Coach Wannstedt, and each time they did, and it really kind of speaks to, A, their coach, and B, the character of the players, Pat. I mean, this is a group that absolutely believes.
They really do. And, they're a neat bunch to talk to. I was up there a couple of weeks ago, and Kenneth Walker has a kind of modest demeanor about him. But he means business. Everybody on the team said that the minute he walked in the offseason, the first offseason workout, he took over. I mean, he's a monster in the weight room. He works hard at everything he does, and I think that showed his teammates right away what he's about. We've talked, obviously, in this show in the past about Peyton Thorne and Jaden Reed and their connection. They've got, just a really nice bond, I think, there. And they've got a lot of players that have kind of really come together and developed. And you're right that Mel Tucker certainly sets the tone. And as you were talking about earlier with Dave Wannstedt there, just went into this game unafraid. He was going to make the big calls, the tough calls, going for those 2-point plays. A lot of people thought, he's chasing points too early. Worked out great. 4th and 4, the throw down the field. Great execution, but heck of a call there. They just went into that game and just went for it, and that was really fun to see.
So the first domino is down for them, and we know what still lies ahead. Of course, they still have to play Ohio State. They still have to play against Penn State. But how about this game coming up this week? I mean, how concerned are you about going in and taking on Purdue? We know Boilermakers have kind of been giant killers here. That's a challenging game, particularly given the way that Purdue throws it around and the issues Michigan State's had on the back end.
Yeah, no, it screams trap game, and everybody can see that, but that doesn't mean you can avoid the trap just because you know it. And Mel Tucker talked about it at his press conference, we know what we're going up into, but so did Iowa a couple of weeks ago, and Purdue handled them easily. Purdue is a good team. They've got the capability. They can throw it on you. They can rush the passer. They've got some ways that they can give you some problems. And so I think, if David Bell shows up and you can't cover him, they maybe get a couple turnovers there. Michigan State starts all of a sudden to feel a pressure that he hasn't felt before. You're in a different situation. And, again, the emotional reservoir, these are young guys and they can bounce back quickly, but still they expended a lot. And the atmosphere was so celebratory and so excited after that game. It's not as easy as just saying, well, we'll get past it and do it. That can be harder to do than it is to say, we'll be ready the next week.
16 wins for Purdue as an unranked team against top 5 opponents. That is the most of any school in college football. So the challenge is obvious for Michigan State. The challenge for Michigan now is kind of pick themselves up off the mat. They really played well. I mean, again, it's one play here, one play there. Any of them go their way, and they come out with a huge win. Now what, though, for Jim Harbaugh and his crew?
I expect them to be okay, Dave. And part of it, they have a little bit of a soft landing coming out of this against Indiana. But this isn't a game where I don't think their confidence should have been shaken. Because, as you said, they did play well. And it's not like, oh, my gosh, we're no good. We got blown off the ball. We couldn't tackle. We couldn't cover. We couldn't block. No, those things weren't true. It was we should be ticked because we just let that game get away. We played a good team, and they were one play better here or there. But we're still good enough. And I think that so you come out of that still probably feeling like you are a good team, and also now with a little added resolve. First of all, your back is very much against the wall, but secondly, you're mad that you lost that game. So I really expect Michigan to be okay coming out of that. The one thing I want to see, and Coach Wannstedt related to it a little bit, is get back to running the ball a little bit more. They've upped their throws in Big Ten play here in the last few weeks significantly. They probably need to get back to a little more balance where you're dictating things with the run and then complementing with the pass. So I'll see if their game plan's a little more run heavy against the Hoosiers this week.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, that's the weakness of Michigan State is that pass defense, and they hit on the big one early with Andrell Anthony, and you can see why that might have been part of the game plan of, hey, this is where these guys are vulnerable. But certainly hear what you're saying. What about Ohio State? And of course, that becomes, all this is forgotten if Michigan figures out a way to beat Ohio State at the end of the year. Did that close call with Penn State alter your view of the Buckeyes in any way?
I still think they're the most talented team in the league, probably ultimately the best team. I think the gap is smaller than I thought at first. I would have said it was a bit of a chasm before last week. Now I'd say it's a little bit smaller. I was, again, very impressed with what Michigan State did, impressed with Michigan, and I think Ohio State has showed a little bit of vulnerability. Secondary certainly jumps to mind. red zone execution on offense. And that's one thing you look ahead. Okay, Michigan State, good in the red zone defensively. Ohio State, not good in the red zone offensively. If it comes down to scoring touchdowns or kicking field goals, do they end up on the wrong side of that the way the Wolverines did against the Spartans? So, I look at them. They are incredibly explosive. They have zero weaknesses on offense. The weaknesses on defense aren't huge, but I think they're big enough that they can possibly be exploited. So I still put Ohio State number one, but I think there's less of a gap between them and the Spartans and Wolverines than I had anticipated.
I want to get into the playoff with you in just a minute. We'll take a quick break before we do that. But you were talking about Kenneth Walker. There's been so much Heisman buzz this week. You're a Heisman voter. I'm obviously one as well. There are a lot of us out there. In your opinion, is Kenneth Walker the front runner right now?
You bet. Absolutely. There's nothing not to like about him and what he's done this season. Nation's leading rusher, 5 touchdowns, 197 yards, and spectacular yards in that game. Start, stop, change directions, break tackles. It was really impressive. And we've been sitting around waiting for somebody to step forward and be the Heisman favorite. Well, he sure did it on a huge stage. So I think he's clearly the front runner at this point. And we'll see. It's a pretty muddled group behind him. I think he's got some daylight on everyone else.
Oh, what a story that would be. Michigan State, of course, never had a Heisman Trophy winner. All right, sit tight here, Pat. We are going to turn the page at what's going to be the big story in college football tonight. What will the top 4 look like? What should the top 4 look like? Pat gives his thoughts on that. We anticipate the new playoff rankings next. Good one Saturday here on the Big Ten Network. Wisconsin trying to stay in the Big Ten race, going to Rutgers to take on a Scarlet Knights team fresh off its first conference win. It's Big Ten football powered by Unleaded 88, 3:30 Eastern on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Again, the big story in college football today, the new playoff rankings come out this evening. You see where the Big Ten has stood in the playoff era. They have had a team in the initial top 4 in 4 of the previous 6 years, including the prior 2. Of course, the Buckeyes made the playoff each of the last 2 years. So we'll see where the Big Ten stands tonight. Michigan State, Ohio State, the 2 that could maybe make some sort of claim on that top 4. Pat Forde from Sports Illustrated rejoining us. Who is your top 4? Put yourself in the position of a committee member, Pat. Who would you have top 4 on your ballot?
Georgia number 1 by a mile. I would have Michigan State second, Cincinnati third, and it's an interesting 4th spot. Boy, I think I would go Oregon right now with that 4th spot.
Okay, maybe more telling, do you believe the committee will follow what you think? Like, do you believe Cincinnati's going to get a top 4 spot? Do you think Oregon will be ahead of Ohio State? What do you think the committee will do? I mean, I think everyone knows Georgia's going to be number 1, right? There's not even a conversation about that. Where it gets interesting is number 2 and going forward. What do you think, based on what we know of past committees, this group will do?
Well, yeah, 2 through 7 is very interesting, very much open to debate. I expect the committee will probably have Alabama in there, whether it's 4th, whatever, as the first of the 1-loss teams. Historically, the committee hates teams from the group of 5. What they did to Cincinnati last year was criminal. So I'm not holding my breath thinking that this year they're going to say, oh, never mind, we like you more. We'll see how it plays out, but I wouldn't be shocked if Oklahoma is ahead of Cincinnati. If that happens, Dave, I'll lose my mind because I just think that would be such a travesty. Oklahoma has done next to nothing this season. And at least Cincinnati did go into Notre Dame Stadium and win handily against a 1-loss team. So I'm not putting a lot of faith in the committee to see things the way I do. I should probably be a one-man committee, but since I'm not, we'll let them call the shots.
It is a flawed system that somehow they have not arrived at that as the conclusion of you simply just deciding who your top 4 teams are. I hear you on Oklahoma. I mean, they've had a ton of close calls against below-average opposition, frankly, including most notably the game against Kansas, where they were trailing well into the second half of that game. It'll be fascinating to see how that team is treated. I think Cincinnati's going to be really interesting because you can put Cincinnati in the top 4 today, and still move them down by virtue of the fact that they're not going to be able to reinforce their schedule as the season goes on, whereas some of these other teams will. In other words, you could put Cincinnati ahead of Ohio State, and then as Ohio State goes on and were they to run the table, that would mean they were to beat Michigan State and they were to beat Michigan. Then all of a sudden you can say, well, they elevated their resume and Cincinnati wasn't able to do that. So I would say I think they will put Cincinnati up there because that Notre Dame win's a good win, Pat. Notre Dame's proven themselves to be a good, not great team.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is a good win. Now, you're right that Cincinnati's in that precarious position where the rest of the American Athletic Conference just hasn't really helped them out that much. You've got SMU that now has a loss after an incredible ending against Houston. You've got them later in the season. You could end up playing a one-loss Houston team in a championship game. Both those games could help you a little bit, but the rest of the schedule just is not there. Central Florida has not had a very good season. You don't get to play Memphis. You'd play too many of the weaker teams such as Temple and Tulane. But this is, here we get back to this. You got to play who's in your league, and that's the way it goes. Like the New England Patriots were in a bad division of the AFC. Didn't mean they were a bad team. And fortunately, they were in a playoff structure that was big enough to allow the divisional champions to all get in. In college football, we want to keep it at 4, and guess who should be in? That's my problem with this system.
No, it's rough. I mean, again, it is a flawed system, and it's why there is this hue and cry to expand the system. No question about it. Ohio State, Oregon is really interesting, and I don't think there could be much argument again. What you're saying is Oregon beat Ohio State head-to-head. These two teams played, and this is the team that won. Again, kind of what I was talking about with Coach Wannstedt, though. At a certain point, I do think there's still, you have the flexibility to flip that because I hear what you're saying. Oregon can play who's on their schedule. You saw them lose to Stanford, though, and I know there were all kinds of extenuating circumstances, but Stanford is an average to below average team this year. It is a bad loss, no matter all those other things that are going on, your offensive coordinators in there and all that. So I do still think you can put them there and say they played head-to-head and we don't have enough material to prove otherwise, so they're comparable teams at this point, while still saying down the line, if Ohio State wins what's left on their schedule and Oregon wins what's left on their schedule, Ohio State will have proven more than the Ducks.
Yeah, well, there's going to be that potentially, that argument, battle royale could go all the way to the end, obviously, if both teams win out. And yes, Ohio State will have played a heck of a resume, and Ohio State will be able to say, you know what? It was the second week of the season. We had a freshman quarterback and a lot of other young guys out there. We got better. But the Ducks are going to turn around and say, you know what? You got to be good every week in college football. That's what part of the whole thing, every week matters. That it should always matter how you are in September versus how you are in November. But it doesn't necessarily work like this. What this reminds me of, Dave, is 1993 for the old folks out there listening. Notre Dame beat Florida State head-to-head and then lost to a worse team the next week, to Boston College. They had the exact same records. Florida State ended up being number 1 because Notre Dame had a worse loss. This could be a similar situation where the team that won head-to-head still doesn't get the benefit of the doubt.
It has long been an imperfect system, that's for sure. What do you think the committee will do with Michigan?
Boy, I think they probably dropped to the end of what I think are the 4 best one-loss teams, which is Alabama, Oregon, Ohio State, and then Michigan. But it's a pretty big penalty to pay for losing on the road to an undefeated team by 4 points in a game that you led most of the way. It's tough. The one thing Michigan doesn't have is a great win. Now, the victory in Camp Randall is continuing to get a little bit better as we go along, and maybe by the end it looks real good. But for now, I think they probably are somewhere around, the 7th or 8th team when this thing comes out tonight.
Notre Dame, any hope for them at this point?
I don't think so. Don't see a path for them. And I think Brian Kelly's done one of his best coaching jobs because I don't think they're as talented as they have been in years past. Certainly not as experienced. He's done a heck of a job winning games. But you look at the rest of the schedule, there's just not a lot of meat on the bone. And if you go with Stanford, as you said, is not that good. USC, not that good. The Wisconsin win, it's a good win, but not a landmark kind of victory. The one really good team you played was Cincinnati at home, and you lost by double digits. So I just don't think, even if they go 11-1, and you're lacking that 13th data point that they like to talk about, I'm not sure it's going to be enough for Notre Dame to get into the mix.
I can't wait to start talking data points. Tonight is data point night. Pat Forde, great stuff as always. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thank you, Dave.
We will turn our attention to field hockey. Coming up next, the head coach of one of the many Final Four contenders in the Big Ten set to join us. Look ahead to what should be a wild postseason with Tracey Fuchs. Northwestern field hockey has been ranked number one in its history, but it had never beaten number one, at least until Friday, when the Cats knocked off Iowa in Iowa City. Ana Medina Garcia chipping in the game winner off a penalty corner to provide the 2-1 margin. NU will be the 5th seed in the Big Ten tournament when it gets underway Thursday at Rutgers, taking on Michigan. It is a league that includes 6 of the top 7 teams in the nation in this week's poll, which just came out today. So that 4-5 game is also a battle of number 2 versus number 5 in the country. We are joined by Tracey Fuchs, Northwestern head coach. She is our big interview. And Tracey, this league is ridiculous. I mean, I cannot get over the fact that Michigan is the 4 seed in the Big Ten tournament, and they're ranked 2nd in the nation. You are the 5 seed. You're ranked 5th in the nation. It's crazy. I mean, how would you kind of characterize Big Ten play this year?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, we have 6 teams that will most likely make the NCAA tournament, with the winner plus maybe 5 of 8 at-large bids. So we're really looking forward to the Big Ten tournament. Anybody can win this tournament, and it's really going to prepare us for the next step, which is NCAA's the following weekend.
How big a boost psychologically is it for your team going through this kind of bloodbath that is the Big Ten to have beaten number 1 heading into the postseason?
Yeah, it's great. The Big Ten is having a fabulous year. We've always been one of the top 2 conferences in the country, and now to have 6 out of 7 in the top 7 in the RPI is just really great for the sport, great for our conference, and we're looking forward to hopefully having 3 to 4 Big Ten teams host the first round of NCAAs.
You have been playing really well. Your team's won 5 straight games now heading into the postseason. How have you seen this team grow through the course of the year?
Yeah, it started early. We were missing some players who were representing the USA team. Other players stepped up, and really we haven't looked back. We've lost some really tough games, 2 in double overtime, and another 1-goal game. All of our games have been 1-goal games as the season has progressed, and we're battle tested, and really looking forward to our matchup with Michigan on Thursday.
Your team is noted for its speed. How can you use speed to impose your will on a game in field hockey?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a sport that doesn't use it. Maybe table tennis, but we're fast. We're fast everywhere, but we have those young ladies they have the speed and the skill to back it up. With Maddie Zimmer, Aaliyah Marshall, Katie Jones, we have the ability to counterattack really, really quickly. And we like to attack. We like to take chances and get, between 10 and 20 shots a goal. And we know if we do, some of those are going to hopefully fall.
I want to talk a little bit about this program. I mentioned they've been number 1 in the past. This is a program that's been to 4 Final Fours, that had a really proud history. But when you took over in 2009, it was in a bad spot. It's been 14 years since they've made it to an NCAA tournament. What has been the process of getting Northwestern back to this spot of prominence in the sport?
Yeah, it's been fun. I think, Northwestern's always had a great tradition and history. And when we came in, we tried to change little things about the culture, team first mentality, and, it's all about recruiting and, trying to keep your staff together. And I think we've done a good job on most of those fronts, and we're ready to put the pieces together and vie for a national championship.
I know you took a real leadership position among the coaches at Northwestern during the pandemic. You would host a bunch of coaches every week at your house around the fire pit. How important was it to kind of keep communication going within a department during what was a time that was so challenging for everyone everywhere?
I mean, it was huge. We're so fortunate that we were able to, 1, be with our team, and 2, be out in the backyard with the fire pit. I mean, I love the Northwestern coaches so much. We're really, really tight. Every Wednesday we did educational sessions with each other, whether it was fundraising or recruiting or coaching, and it's just a special place, and I'm so grateful and fortunate to have coached here for 13 years.
I want to talk a little bit about your background. You're from Long Island. Your first love was street hockey. Tell me about your street hockey career.
Yeah, I always thought I would play for the New York Rangers growing up, but that kind of fell through. I think my height maybe. But I grew up with 5 boys next door, and we played street hockey and roller hockey. They were bloodbaths. Really taught me how to be competitive, and obviously I never looked back. I'm still as competitive as ever, and maybe died down a little bit off the field hockey field, but still enjoy competition for sure.
So wait, that would have been the glory days of the Islanders, and you're on Long Island, but you were a Rangers fan?
Absolutely. Rangers came first. My whole family was Ranger fans, and so we didn't like that other team on the island.
So how did you transition from ice hockey to field hockey?
Yeah, both of my older sisters played field hockey, and we had one of the best high school coaches in the country. So when I was little, I would ride my bike up to their practices. I'd see what they were doing, and I would come home and set up the cones and do it myself. And, street hockey, ice hockey, field hockey, very, very similar. I think being a multi-sport athlete really, really helped me. And, I never looked back. I loved playing for UConn. I loved playing for the national team, and I love coaching here at Northwestern.
You mentioned playing for UConn. You are referred to by some as the Michael Jordan of field hockey. I mean, you were a great, great player. You were National Player of the Year. You were a 3-time All-American. You represented the U.S. internationally, including in the Olympics. What was your greatest thrill as a field hockey player?
Oh, man, there's so many. I mean, we were supposed to travel on 9/12 right after 9/11 and weren't able to. So we ended up having to play India in a 2-out-of-3 game series to see who would go to the World Cup. And we had to wait 9 months for that to happen. And just everything we went through as a team, and then to beat them 2-out-of-3 was definitely a highlight. And then I would say the other one is walking into the Olympic Stadium in Atlanta, and somehow my mother found me. And anybody who knows my mom knows she carries a cowbell. So I was able to see where she was at. And, you don't go anywhere without family and parent support. So I'm very, very grateful for everybody who's supported me along the way.
You mentioned your competitiveness, and everyone I have talked to about you also mentions your competitiveness. It seems to be the theme that runs through the life of Tracey Fuchs. So we know how it manifests itself in sport. How does it manifest itself outside of sport?
Yeah, it probably gets me in trouble a little bit. Sometimes I have to thumb it down, whether we're playing cards or, walking to the end of the street. I like to be first in anything I do. So I have a lot of fun. And, I think, the pandemic has taught everybody to take a step back and really enjoy the little victories. And I've really tried to do that over the course of the last 2 years.
I know you'd like to get some big victories here going forward. Let's talk about this matchup with Michigan. You played them last month in Ann Arbor. It went to overtime, and they won. What's the key in the rematch here for you getting a victory?
Yeah, I think, that was one of our better games. We played quite well. Their goalkeeper had a phenomenal game. When you play Michigan, it's going to be a 1-goal game. You've got to get a little bit lucky, and you have to bring your A game that day. And typically it comes down to corner execution at the end of the day, both attack-wise and defense-wise. So we've been building our corner attack where we'll be ready to go Thursday, and I know they will be as well, and it'll be a great Big Ten battle.
I cannot wait to watch this tournament this weekend. It should be something else. Tracey Fuchs, thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Go Cats.
Big Ten tailgate on campus this Saturday at Minnesota. Annie Sabo, Brock Vereen, and Anthony Herron will be there. Jerry DiNardo, Joshua Perry, Howard Griffith, and I will be here in studio getting you set for another big day in the conference. It's Tailgate presented by Land Rover, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And we head to Minneapolis at a good time. Gophers have won 4 in a row since their surprising loss to Bowling Green. Have really gotten the offense going, rushed for nearly 1,000 yards in those 4 games. Tanner Morgan in the passing attack, good enough. Really good team on both lines of scrimmage, actually over 1,000 yards now that I kind of do the math in my head, right? Yeah, it's been really something. So they dismantled Northwestern on Saturday, 40 minutes. Time of possession for them. They had 1 negative play. They were 10 of 14 on 3rd down. And this has just kind of been who they are, Wani. It feels like a team that's really rocking and rolling.
It's amazing, you think about the whole Big Ten, and we're talking the West now. We had Iowa that was the conversation for how great they were doing, and now they've fallen the other way. Wisconsin was a conversation earlier for how they struggled. This, Minnesota, they have been as consistent as any team really in the whole Big Ten. And we're talking the West now. And you got to give P.J. Fleck a lot of credit, his offensive coordinator. I mean, they at one point last week, it was the 5th running back on their roster that was in the game. This offensive line, I mean, it could be as good offensive line as a total group across the board. And I don't know how many of these guys are going to get opportunities to go play the NFL, but the NFL ought to come in and look at these guys, because this doesn't happen by accident against the competition that they're playing. And the schedule, I think, fits them pretty good.
Oh, I do too.
They got Wisconsin, but they got them in their backyard.
Yep. They have Illinois coming up. They go to Iowa. That's going to be a huge game, no doubt. And then Indiana and Wisconsin, as you said, to finish things off. By the way, I think my college diploma was just rescinded. It is less than 1,000 yards. If you're under 250 per game over 4 games, that's less than 1,000 yards. I just figured that out. Are they the best team in the West, in your opinion, right now? What about Wisconsin and the way the Badgers are playing?
God, Wisconsin, it's all about the turnovers. I want to say that their offense is got it together, but I'm still not sold. I'm really not. Mertz makes me nervous, I'll be honest with you, but their defense, I got to hear the first 6 games, they had 4 takeaways to help their offense, right? The last 2 games, 8 turnaways. When you give the ball that many times to your offense in good field position, they should score points, and they are. So at least they're getting confidence now. I mean, they're going to be there in the final week. I promise you, Paul Chris will do a great job with those guys.
No, and I'm with you. And I mean, to me, the big thing was it was almost stunning to see them at the beginning of the year, to the degree to which they shot themselves in the foot with the turnovers. I mean, it wasn't up until 2 weeks ago, this team was last in the nation in turnover margin. I mean, Wisconsin, you think of them as so kind of fundamentally sound. And to your point, Wani, you mentioned the turnovers they've generated. They're +6 now the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and
they're helping them.
The scary thing is, as a coach, you can't count on getting those. You got to say, we got to win these games if everything's even. Now, if we get them, it's a bonus, so we'll see.
Right. They go to Rutgers this week. They've got Nebraska, Northwestern, and then that game against Minnesota. And it really feels like that game against Minnesota could be for the Big Ten championship. What about Purdue and this matchup with Michigan State? We talked about a little bit with Pat. Purdue, we know the damage they can do through the air, and this is the area where Michigan State's vulnerable.
And they have the history of upsetting ranked teams. They already upset somebody at top 5, so this is not new to them. And, Iowa was as good as anybody in the country when they beat them. So I think they're looking forward to this challenge. You know what I want to see? I want to see Mel Tucker. How is his team going to bounce back, right? This was a huge win for them, and now they're going to play, Purdue on the road. This is going to be a real test. I mean, he's going to earn his money this week. Last week, no problem. Earn your money this week and get this team ready.
He's so even-keeled, right?
I know.
And so it makes you think that he'll figure out a way to keep this team with some perspective. But I have to believe it was wild on campus last couple days.